right now, without LeBron, Lakers are struggling.
Let me tell you about a team I hate, all right? I know the Dallas Cowboys
get this win. So I don't know, Jack. It's a big decision.
I've often said that the people who run baseball, they try very hard to ruin it.
I'm from Brooklyn. I don't have a problem saying space.
Pittsburgh at Buffalo.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought I was right. So anyway,
Yeah, Mac, you're really interested in these playoffs.
so
This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
Good morning. You're listening to the Mac and Jack Sports Show on Northeast Streaming Sports.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Sports Memory Show. I'm your host, Mac, with your co-host, Jack Hirsch. I couldn't make it in today for some personal issues, but we're here to bring you your sports memory, a little sports history every Saturday on our show. Welcome to the show. And today we're going to cover three areas. We're going to talk about Major League Baseball. We're going to talk about boxing and also the NFL. And we're going to go back to the early 60s to talk about these three subjects. Today, a legend, I guess you could say, or at least one of the best players in San Francisco Giants history, Cepeda passes away. Jack, tell us a little bit about these nine-time All-Star, if you could.
Yeah, Orlando Cepeda, you could say his career's been twofold as far as teams go, with the San Francisco Giants, in which he won the Rookie of the Year award. And then in 1967, he wins the Most Valuable Player award as the leader of that St. Louis Cardinal team. And that St. Louis Cardinal team was obviously led by a great pitcher in Bob Gibson, but the real leader there in the clubhouse was really Orlando Cepeda in 1967. And they also went to the series in 68, the Cardinals, where they blew a 3-1 lead to the Tigers that particular year. But when Orlando Cepeda was with the Giants, there was some debate going on, actually, as to who was a better player, him or Willie Mays. There was actual debate, in San Francisco. That's how good Cepeda was. You know how I'm going to compare the two? Let's say Aaron Judge is the equivalent of Willie Mays for the Yankees, and Juan Soto would then be the equivalent of Orlando Cepeda. And you can argue, well, who's better, Judge or Soto? No one's really debating that much, but they did it a bit in San Francisco. Obviously, you'd have to give Willie Mays the edge when all was said and done. There's no real debate there. But Cepeda had a great career. He hit .297, a lifetime batting average, knocked in over 1,300 runs. He's a Hall of Famer. It took him 20 years to get in, over pure silliness, because he was caught with marijuana. And the way the voters thought then, it was like, oh, what a terrible thing. It was as if he was shipping cocaine somewhere. That was their mindset at the time. So it took him 20 years to get in the Hall of Fame because of that. In this day and age, if he was caught with it, maybe he'd lose a couple of votes somewhere, but it wouldn't prevent him from getting into the Hall of Fame for such a long period of time. And Orlando Cepeda, great hitter. He was primarily a first baseman, throughout his career. He played some outfield. And those Giant teams that he was on, and the Cardinal teams, were really special teams. I mean, you think of that 1962 Giant team that lost the World Series in 7 games to the Yankees. They came a few inches away from winning it when Willie McCovey made the last out of the 7th game with runners up second and third. I guess you're going to want to get to that later, or we're on it now, man.
We'll talk. We're going to talk about, of course.
Okay, but Cepeda, great ball player on the field, but he was also a great leader. Great leader. Passed away at age 86. Had had a lot of health issues. over the years, but one of the great players in both Giant and Cardinal history.
Yeah, and it was years before he, the Cardinals, and listen, a great ball player, Hall of Famer, All-Star, of course, playing next to Willie Mays. It's easy to kind of get overshadowed, Jack, right? I mean, I don't know if you would say he was overshadowed or not, but when you look back at the Giants, you're going to talk Willie Mays more than you're going to talk about Cepeda. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, it's weird when you talk about those Giant teams in the early 60s, especially the one that went to the 62 World Series and nearly won it. You talk about Mays and McCovey. Then Mays, McCovey, Juan Marichal. Their names always come up before Cepeda's. And then you maybe ask who else was on the team, and you say, well, Orlando Cepeda, he was a tremendous player. But he's a Hall of Famer. Bottom line, Orlando Cepeda is a Hall of Famer.
Definitely. In the early 60s, the Yankees went to the World Series 3 times, 60 through 63, 62 anyway. I'm not sure about
60
60.
to 64, Max. They went 5 years in a row to start off the 60s.
I want to concentrate on 60 through 62 for this show anyway, Jack. And of course, Casey Stengel still a manager in 60. Ralph Houk took over as manager for the Yankees after that. He was on, of course, the coaching staff of Casey Stengel. And in 1960, they were 97 and 57. As I said, they were managed by Casey Stengel. They lost to the Pirates in 7 games. And this was the beginning of the M&M boys, right? Mantle and Maris, who batted 3rd and 4th for the Yankees. Never seen such a duo like this since probably Garrick and Ruth, with as much impact as they had on those Yankee teams.
Well, that was in 1961 when the
really
Maris-Mantle so-called rivalry, a so-called comparison. I won't say it was a rivalry because both guys were close friends, and they even lived together. They even shared an apartment together. They were good buddies, so there wasn't an exact rivalry between the two, but there was an indirect competition when they were going after Babe Ruth's home run record of 60 homers, because each was making a run at him. Each was pushing the other guy.
Yeah, even in 60, Jack, you figure Mantle's batting 275 with 40 home runs, 94 RBIs. Maris hits 283 with 39 home runs and 112 RBIs. So you could see that this was coming. I don't know. For those 3 years, I'm going to kind of delve away from what I was going to say. Who was the better player? Was it Mantle or was it Maris?
Well, if you take it year by year, that's a great question, Mac. In that 3-year span, who was the better player? I never thought of that. That's a great question. In 1960, they had the closest MVP race in history, Maris and Mantle, and Maris edged them out by the closest of margins. And I kind of think it may have been because of what you just mentioned now, the stat. Maris knocked in more runs, okay? He knocked in, about 25 to 30 more runs or thereabouts. So I think maybe that was the difference maker with the voters, because when they took a look at, the guy's stats, but it was the closest vote in history. Maris hit 39 homers, Mantle hit only one more at 40. And who was better that particular year? I mean, I don't know what to say. Mantle was the center fielder. Maris is the right fielder. We'll get back to that in a moment. And then in 61, Maris breaks the record with 61 homers. Mantle hit 54. But there's something people don't really want to talk about. Maris was hitting in front of Mantle.
Right.
Maris wasn't walked intentionally one time all season long. They had to pitch to him because Mickey was behind them. Let's say you flip-flop their slots. You put Mantle 3rd and Maris 4th. Maybe Mantle is the one that breaks the record. Maris certainly doesn't break the record if he's hitting behind Mantle. In fact, early in the season, Maris was hitting behind Mantle at fourth, and Mantle was hitting third, and Maris wasn't hitting early in the year. So Ralph Houck, the manager, flip-flopped the lineup where Maris was hitting third and Mantle was hitting fourth. So that kind of got, Maris really going.
Yeah.
Okay, so Maris hit 61 homers, Mantle hits 54. Mantle was injured late in the year, so he kind of fell out of the race. And they win the World Series in 61, and that's a forgotten team. Some people at the time are calling that the greatest baseball team of all time.
Yeah.
Some people are saying even better than the 27 Yankees. That certainly was debatable. And then in 1962, the Yankees win the World Series again, but Mantle and Maris's home run production went down a bit. Maris went from 61 to 33 homers. Mantle went from 54 to 30 homers. Still good numbers at the time, but it's about close to half their production from the year before. But to answer your question, if I had to say who the better player was for those 3 years, I might change my mind if you ask me this late in the week. I would have to say maybe Roger Maris, because he was an outstanding right fielder. He made a really good defensive play to, prevent the Giants from scoring the tying run with 2 outs in the seventh inning, in the ninth inning of the seventh game, the 62 series. But it's debatable again, because I could say, well, Mantle posed so much a greater threat. And what I don't have in front of me, Mac, are the amount of walks each guy got. If Mantle had an overwhelming number of walks more than did Roger Maris, that certainly would, be a good argument in his favor.
So in 62, Jack, you said the home runs dropped off a little bit, but Mantle did bat 317, and Maris hits 104, drives in 141 runs. So even though the home run production goes down, Mantle's average is higher. Maris's RBI total goes up. So they're still driving in runs, and they're still batting at a great pace for power hitters, right? There ain't a lot of power hitters that bat over 300 today, that's for sure. So, I mean, you're talking these two guys are not just power hitters, but all around they're great players.
Oh, no, without question. I didn't realize Maris knocked in 141 runs in 1962. Wow, that's outstanding. That is a lot of runs to knock in. I mean, I didn't realize to that extent. I knew about the 33 homers, but that is tremendous production, for him to have done that.
And you make a
but
great
I think
point.
Mickey won the MVP award in 62, though.
I think he came close to winning the Triple Crown if he didn't win the Triple Crown that year, Jack, right?
No, not in 62. Mickey won the Triple Crown in 1956 when he hit 52 homers, knocked in 130 runs, and hit 365. That was his Triple Crown, in 56.
But even so, I mean, you're batting 317 as a power hitter. To me, that's unbelievable. So these two guys are, like you're saying, they're having a competition. Of course, Mickey Mantle in the end was the better player. Roger Maris kind of faded out a little bit. But for those 3 years, I mean, what a combination you had there. And great point with Mantle protecting Maris. I mean, if it was the other way around, as you said, it could have been different numbers. And of course, Maris hits the 61 home runs in that year, 1960, I think it was. It went from 150 games, or 61, 154 games to 162. They originally put an asterisk on there because of the more games. And of course, if Babe Ruth had 8 more games, maybe he does hit 2 more home runs or 3 more home runs.
Yeah.
Who knows, right? So I mean, as the games expand in all sports, you see the totals going up. And of course,
that's why, Mac, it's arguable. There were a lot of people that argued against the asterisk, saying, well, a season is a season. The players in Babe's time didn't have to travel as much, as far as in Maris's time. So, and that's correct. There's so many intangibles involved. For most of my life, I didn't believe in asterisks, but now I kind of do. I think records while they were exciting, they were a bit overrated, Mac. There's so much that goes into it, so much circumstance that goes into it. I mean, even watching a baseball game, like a perfect game is great to watch, but a guy who pitches a two-hitter might have pitched a far superior game than someone who pitched a perfect game. Because the guy who pitches a perfect game, he might have 3 outstanding plays in the field. He might get lucky on an umpire's call. You know, the ball comes off the bat right at a fielder that's hit solidly. I mean, so the case in Maris having 8 more games, it's the same Mac now. The NFL has a 17-game season. So if someone holds a rushing record for 14 games and that gets broken by someone who had 2-3 games more to play, I mean, what are we exactly looking at? You know,
Right.
the guy who had 14 games, let him play 3 more games. And what might he have done, you know, with those games? You know, we'll never know. That's why I'm not against asterisks now. It doesn't diminish anyone. It should be the most homers in a 162-game season. You know, for Maris and Ruth, the most homers in a 154-game season. Why not let them both be record holders at the same time? I mean, it's
Right.
nothing a matter with that.
I agree. And you're the pitcher on that and it was the last game that Maris hits the 61st home run. Do you let him hit it, Jack? I mean, remember Green Bay Packers, everybody said, well, Strahan had the record because Brett Favre fell down in front of him and gave him the sack. But as the pitcher, this is history here. He's had 60 home runs. Do you say, the heck with it, I'm coming right down the middle and let him tear it up?
Well, I think they should pitch to him. The only reason I could see not pitching to him, if you're playing Maris's team and the game means a lot for your team, you know, the World Series is at stake. If you win the game, you go to the World Series. If you lose, you're out. If both teams are tied, you have to do whatever you can to help your team win that game. That's your first obligation. Not think, well, he has the record, so we're going to pitch him. Well, the pitcher is Tracy Stallard, and yeah, I mean, he pitched to him. He didn't groove the ball. He pitched to him. I'm going to tell you one of the most gutless things I ever saw a pitcher do, which no one talks about at all. Okay, former Yankee pitcher Al Downing, okay? He's the guy who gave up actually the 715th homer to Hank Aaron, but that's not what I'm talking about. He's pitching for the Dodgers. Dave Kingman comes to the plate. Dave Kingman has 3 home runs already. You know Dave Kingman wants to tie the major league record of 4 homers in a game. He's swinging for the fences. Al Downing bounces, it seems, every pitch off the plate. Every pitch off the plate. Doesn't throw to him. He makes the pitches so bad that Kingman's only option is to either walk or swing at unhittable pitches, basically, and hope he gets lucky, you know, on an unhittable pitch. I thought it was gutless by Downing to bounce the ball off the plate like that. Pitch to the darn guy. You know, unless you have some grudge against the guy and you hate the guy's guts and you say the heck with him. He's not getting anything, you know, he's a bad dude or whatever. But I never liked that what Al Downing did, you know, in that game.
We talked a little bit before the show, and when I think of Yankee first basemen, I think of Lou Gehrig and Don Mattingly. Those 2 names pop right into my head right away. But there was a first baseman back then that was hitting 20 home runs, driving in over 90 RBIs. And, you know, that's an important thing for your team. You can have 2 great home run hitters that can control a game, but you got to have support. And Jack, honest to God, I'm a lifelong Yankee fan, and I never heard of Bill Sharon before.
Moose Garrett, Mac, you're making yourself sound bad by saying that.
I'm serious.
That's like saying late on, I never heard of Chris Chambliss. I never heard of Tino Martinez. I mean, that sounds bad, Mac.
I'm being honest.
Moose Garrett was overshadowed by all the other great Yankee names. That's the problem was. I mean, he was a terrific player for the Yankees, a terrific first baseman. He put up the numbers, was good defensively. But you had the other big names there. You had Mantle, Maris, Elston Howard. You had Yogi Berra, even though Berra was getting towards the tail end of his career, he was still a big name. You had Whitey Ford. You had Clete Boyer, the great defensive third baseman, wasn't really that much of a hitter there. But Moose Skowron was a cog in that Yankee lineup, a very important part of that Yankee lineup. You know who I'll compare him to when he was playing really well? This season's not a good comparison, to Anthony Rizzo.
Okay.
You could talk about Judge, you could talk about Soto, but if Rizzo was playing up to his standards, he wouldn't be the main guy. Still, it would be Judge and Soto, but Rizzo would be a really important part of that lineup. And that's kind of what Moose Skowron was to those Yankee teams, in the early 60s, until eventually Joe Pepitone came along and, took over first base in 1963.
Right. Three main pitchers of the Yankees in the early 60s. Of course, there was Whitey Ford. You had Ralph Terry and Bill Stafford. Those three pitchers were pitching double digits wins. Whitey had a big one, 25-win season. But again, there's Ralph Terry had a 23-win season, and Stafford was always hitting for those 3 years. Anyways, he was always doing the double-digit wins, and those are very important. You need that starting pitching, as we all know, especially back then. Jack, relief pitchers weren't as utilized as they are today, for sure. So you had to have that good starting pitching to win these games. So the Yankees go 2 for 3. They lost to Pittsburgh in an exciting series. I guess the Giant series that went 7 games too, if I'm reading this correctly.
Yeah,
that was a very exciting series. Series, as you said, big catch at the end there. Pretty much the 61 series, Jack. I mean, I guess I wasn't old enough to watch it, but I guess that another win for the Yankees, and before their demise happened in the middle 60s. Was Mantle and Maris better than Ruth and Gehrig? I don't think so. But there are people.
Well, for that one season, 61. You could say in 1960 you could say in that 3-year gap or the 2-year gap, they were just as good for a couple of years. I mean, they were just as good. But we're talking about a couple of years. We're not talking about career-wise. It's quite obviously we're not talking about longevity. What they did over their career. Certainly not Maris. You mentioned a point before. I just want to get back to Ralph Terry. Who he would come out of the bullpen, but at that, he was primarily a starter. But Ralph Terry would have been such a subject of baseball debate in a bad way. The way Bill Buckner was harassed over missing the ground ball, he came so close to it. In the 1960 World Series in the 7th game, scores tied, Bill Mazeroski leads off. It was Ralph Terry who gave up the home run to Bill Mazeroski. He gave up the walk-off homer. Now he's on the mound. Okay, a couple of years later, 7th game of the World Series, Yankees up 1-0. Giants have runners on 2nd and 3rd. Imagine if Ralph Terry had given up the game-winning hit to Willie McCovey and had blown 2 7th games, in the 9th inning. That would have really, been a part of baseball lore. But fortunately for him, the line drive McCovey hit went right to Bobby Richardson, to end the game, and the Yankees, won the World Series. But in that 1960 World Series, we normally say, well, the better team usually wins. It was the craziest World Series. All 4 of the Pirate wins were close games, very close games. All 3 of the Yankee wins were complete blowouts. They outclassed the Pirates. The Yankees were thought to have the better team. Now, the Pirates had a lot of talent on that team. They still had Roberto Clemente, but he wasn't the Roberto Clemente he would later become. He wasn't a Roberto Clemente, for example, who led the Pirates to the World Series victory comeback over the Baltimore Orioles. He wasn't quite that Clemente that, he would become, but the Pirates, they were a gritty group. They beat the Yankees, and Mickey Mantle said after the 1960 World Series, it's the only time he cried after, losing a game. The only time, because they really felt we had the better team. How did we lose to these guys? We blew them out all 3 games we won, and the 4 games we lose are nail biters. It was really upsetting series for the Yankees to lose. And Casey Stengel got fired after. Had the Yankees won that series, chances are Casey stays on. And then they win in 1961 with Casey. And unless he fouls things up in 62, chances are, they'd have a good chance of winning in 62 the way they did on the Hawk. And then what do you do with Casey? I mean, the Yankees made in the 5 years, 60 to 64, that they went to the World Series. People talk about how impatient George Steinbrenner was, but consider this, Matt. Casey Stengel goes to the World Series in 1960, loses in 7 games, and gets fired. Yogi Berra's the manager in 1964. The Yankees go to the World Series, lose in 7 games, and Yogi gets fired.
Wow. Yeah. That's true. And I mean, you're right. You talk about Steinbrenner, the owner of the Yankees.
Was easy going compared to that.
Hey, back then it was, if you don't win the World Series, it's a bad year for the Yankees.
If you're Yankee, we were spoiled. Yankee fans were spoiled. Yeah.
And hopefully, the Yankees could do something this year. So let's get to your expertise, Jack. Floyd Patterson. Listen, when you talk about the greatest heavyweights of all time, at least in my realm, my father mentioned him, but nobody mentions Floyd Patterson. I mean, you talk about all the great heavyweights back then of the 50s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. Floyd Patterson seems to get lost.
Well, he wasn't one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. Floyd Patterson was a small heavyweight. He won an Olympic gold medal in Helsinki in 1952. And he was managed and trained by Cus D'Amato, the same Cus D'Amato who later was Mike Tyson's mentor, who brought Tyson through the ranks too. And when Rocky Marciano retired in 1955, the following year, Floyd Patterson fought for the vacant world heavyweight title and knocked out Archie Moore, won the title. Cus D'Amato was very protective of Patterson. He was reluctant to match him against the top contenders that you had in Eddie Machin and Zora Foley, and they avoided Sonny Liston for a long time. There was a blip. They took on Ingemar Johansson, who knocked out Patterson in 3 rounds, but then Patterson regained the title by knocking out Johansson, and then he stopped him again in a rubber match. Floyd Patterson was the youngest man to ever win the world heavyweight title at age 21. Some people say it's Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson is the youngest belt holder. Patterson won the legitimate vacant world heavyweight title, but Tyson won a version of the belt against Trevor Berbick because there were different sanctioning bodies. There was more than one champion. So Tyson was not the true world heavyweight champion when he stopped Berbick. He was the most exciting fighter heavyweight in the world and the best heavyweight in the world, as we see later on. But at that time, Tyson was only a belt holder. So if you talk to me, the youngest world heavyweight champion in history, it was Floyd Patterson. And he was also the first to regain the title. By the way, change that Cash Huss Clay. The spelling's wrong on there. I'm getting it's hard to look at. But what am I saying? Okay, but
Floyd Patterson.
Floyd Patterson, too. His book. He had a weak chin. But getting back to him regaining the title, that's where I lost my school of thought. all the great heavyweight champions before him never regained the title. Jim Jeffries came out of retirement, got stopped by Jack Johnson. Jack Dempsey tried to regain it from Gene Tunney and knocked them down. That was a famous long count fight, but Tunney got up and Tunney won a decision. Joe Louis retired. He came back to the ring and he took on Ezzard Charles, who had won the vacant title, and Charles defeated Louis. So no one had regained the heavyweight title, before, but Patterson became the first to do it. So that's a noteworthy achievement. He had a weak chin. He'd get knocked down a lot. In fact, Patterson, one of his title defenses was against a fighter named Pete Rademacher, who was an Olympic gold medalist making his pro debut. Patterson fought a heavyweight making his pro debut, and he knocked Patterson down. Patterson said later, I was more embarrassed than hurt, which I believe. And then he knocked Rademacher out. And then Patterson took on Sonny Liston. I give Patterson credit for being a real champion and having character, because his manager, Cus D'Amato, and himself fell out over the Liston situation. D'Amato was completely in charge of Patterson since he was a kid, since he discovered him as a kid. And when Patterson decided to be independent, saying, I'm fighting Liston regardless, I'm not ducking him. Even John F. Kennedy, the president, met Patterson and basically indirectly, reportedly, didn't want him to fight Liston because Liston was ferocious. He had a big punch, and Patterson took Liston on. And so D'Amato left Patterson as a result of that. Liston knocks Patterson out in one round. They never rematch. He knocks him out in a round again.
So we say, that he had a weak chin and maybe he wasn't the greatest heavyweight. Listen, Jack, Tyson Fury gets knocked down almost in every fight. I mean, does that make, does that make him a less of a champion? I mean, and of course, Tyson Fury's a big man. And a UFC fighter almost knocks him out. So, I mean, I don't know if that should take away from what he did in his short time. But you think if he fought in his prime against Marciano in his prime, no contest, Marciano beats him?
Marciano in his prime, at his very best, the Marciano who fought Jersey Joe Walcott, he eventually grinds Patterson down. Marciano wasn't as much as an imposing physical presence as Sonny Liston with a powerful punch, but he was so strong, Marciano. He would keep working. He grinded opponents down. He would eventually get to Patterson, I think it would have taken some time, but I think Marciano, towards the end of his career, he retired at the right time. Because if Marciano continued fighting, he would have fought Patterson about a year after his retirement. And Marciano even admitted, I find it very difficult to train as hard as I used to. I just don't quite train as hard as I used to. I still train very hard, but he lost that little bit of an edge. And I really think had he fought Patterson, about a year after he retired, Marciano would have maybe been ready to be taken. And I would have given Patterson a real good chance of upsetting Marciano. People don't want to hear that, but it would have been a part of Rocky's career where he would have started to decline. That's what I would be projecting from. It wouldn't quite be the peak Marciano, the one who came from behind to beat Jersey Joe Walcott. That Marciano stops Patterson, but the one maybe late in his career, about a year after stopping Archie Moore, I have doubts. Keep this in mind, Patterson beat Archie Moore easy in 5 rounds. Marciano got knocked down and had to struggle a bit, before eventually knocking out Archie Moore in 9 rounds.
So we're going to talk about Bob Foster. A lot of people think he might be the hardest hitting fighter of all time. If you go, in his class and you prorate it, whatever you want to do there, a lot of people thought Bob Foster was an incredible puncher, Jack.
Yeah, you're making a great point, Matt. Bob Foster, division for division, is one of the greatest one-punch fighters in boxing history. You can make an argument he was the best, even if you want to. It's all debatable that no one can hit as hard with one punch, division for division, as Bob Foster did. We talk about the greatest fighters pound for pound, and we compared divisions and tried to rate them. Why don't we do one-punch hitters, division for division? And Foster would rate high in history. I mean, I can't think of a light heavyweight who hit harder with one punch. When he won the title from Dick Tiger in 1968, Tiger had never been knocked out before. Bob Foster, who was a physical freak, 6'3", tall for light heavyweight. He looked like a bit of a string being like Tommy Hearns, but these guys had tremendous power. Knocks Tiger out with one punch to win the world light heavyweight title. And then in some of his defenses, Andy Kendall had like an iron chin, but one uppercut from Foster rendered Kendall basically helpless, and Foster would then follow up. And then there's the devastating KO of Mike Quarry. They exchanged punches in the fourth round. Say what you want about Mike Quarry. Got only stopped a couple of times in his career, but he had an excellent chin. One punch from Foster annihilated him. He was out for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. And in 1972, when Foster defended his title against Quarry in Las Vegas, in the fight before Jerry Quarry fought Muhammad Ali, that was the fight before that in Vegas. I mean, that was one of the most brutal knockouts in boxing history. Foster's one punch knockout of Jerry Quarry.
So Bob Foster, again, one of the greatest in his class. And we get 1960, we get a peek at a future champion, changes his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali, the 1960 Olympic boxing tournament. A lot of the great fighters, Foreman, Frazier, and some of the lighter weights like the Sugar Ray Leonards and on and on and on, came out of the Olympic boxing tournament, Jack, and that's where they started. Muhammad Ali wasn't as big back then as he ended up growing into his body more as he got bigger, but he sure was fast, and he sure showed some people what the future held for the future champion, Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, I mean, that's Cassius Clay, 1960 Olympic gold medalist, and his story's been recounted over and over again. And I mean, what could I say about Cassius Clay, later Muhammad Ali, that really hasn't been said?
Yeah, I agree. So that was the beginning of what some people think was the greatest heavyweight champion of all time. So we'll talk some NFL. The rise of the Green Bay Packers and Vince Lombardi. Vince Lombardi, of course, in his college career, and I want to get this out of the way first. A lot of great coaches coach college military schools. Lombardi was one of them. Parcells was another one. A lot of these coaches and some of the great coordinators came from the military schools, and Lombardi brought his military training, his military attitude to all the football teams he coached, including the Packers. Of course, he was the offensive coordinator of the Giants, left in 58. 59, he goes into Green Bay. The year before, they were 1-10-1, and he turns them around. Let me get to my notes here real quick. He turns them around almost instantly, as they end up going 7-5 and 59. And in the second year, they're in the championship against the Eagles. I read a lot of books on Green Bay Packers and Vince Lombardi, Run the Daylight, all the books that they publish about him. Not all of them, but a good few of them, Jack. And what they said about Lombardi was right away when he came in training camp, he was the hardest coach these Packers had ever seen. Of course, there were a lot of fun times there. People lost their jobs. It was intense. It was long training. Because Lombardi knew in the fourth quarter, if you're not in shape, you're going to lose a lot of games. He wanted to be the best, of course, the team in the best shape. He takes a quarterback that really wasn't doing nothing, Bart Starr, puts him in charge, puts in an offense that is a power sweep, run the daylight kind of thing where he pulls the guards a lot of area blocking that becomes, you're known as zone blocking today. Instead of blocking individuals, they blocked in different territories. And basically, Jack, it was, we're going to run the power sweep and try and stop us. I mean, they knew it was coming, and it was almost impossible to stop. I want to talk a little bit with you about Jim Taylor. Jim Brown was the greatest running back of that era, but Jim Taylor beat him one time as a rushing leader in 1 year, and he was second every year almost to Jim Brown. And Jim Taylor seems to get lost when we talk about the greatest running backs of all time, and we say, well, Jim Brown could have played in today's football. I think Jim Taylor could have too. He was sort of like a John Riggins, Jack. He had pretty good speed and a big guy, but we don't talk about Jim Taylor as much as we do about Jim Brown and some of the other great running backs.
Actually, the more charismatic running back on those Packer teams is Paul Hornung. Right. You had Taylor and Hornung and Taylor, and in that era, you had a halfback and a fullback. It was a little more defined. In this day and age, we don't hear about two elite running backs on a team. We hear like one guy has to stand out being the guy. It's not like they have co-billing. And you're right about the power sweep. You had to have Hornung and Taylor. And more importantly, both guys had to block. They had to be a lead blocker for the other guy whenever they were running, the power sweep. And the Packers, I mean, they had such memorable teams. I didn't realize about the 59 season. For some reason, I always think of 1960 as Lombardi's first season when they went to the championship game, not realizing it really was 1959 where he turned the team around with a bad losing record, and they had a winning record. When he took over in 58 and 59, the Baltimore Colts were the NFL champions, and the Colts would later, in the 60s, maybe be deprived of a championship or two because of the Packers and Lombardi coming up, and they'd always be a little behind the Packers, slightly. Don Shula would be the coach of the Colts. Yeah. Lombardi would be the coach of the Packers. Right. They had some terrific, games in the 60s. But you look at the players on that Packer team. I mean, Hornung, Taylor, Bart Starr, quarterback. You had Max McGee, as a wide receiver. Fuzzy Thurston, Jerry Kramer, as guards. Blocking Herb Hadley, a great cornerback, and on and on.
Yeah, and Ray Nitschke,
a great tackle.
And it's funny because you could see the similarities between the Giants and the Packers, as he kind of used Hornung was his Frank Gifford, and Ray Nitschke was kind of his Sam Huff, and the same basic philosophies they used with the Giants, they used with the Packers, except he was in charge, and it seemed a lot more crisper, Jack. He loses to the Eagles in 1960, or the Packers lose to the Eagles, I should say, and they lost on a few yards away from the touchdown, the end zone. I mean, they were right there at the end.
More than a few yards. I think they were, I'm only estimating, Mac, I think they were on about the Eagle 20-yard line when the game ended. I mean, I'm estimating. I think I'm close. Yeah. I really believe I am. What happened, the Eagles were winning 17-13. The Packers got the ball back, and they were kind of driving down the field in like increments. And then the final play of the game, I forgot who had the ball on the Packers, but time ran out on them. That was the term used by Lombardi. We didn't lose. Time ran out on us, in that game. In a certain sense, they may have been right.
Yeah, and Lombardi in the locker room said after, you will never lose another championship.
Chuck Bednarik, he fell on the ball carrier, who I don't recall who it was, and Ben Derrick wasn't getting up quickly. And then the ball carrier was trying to get up, and then when the final gun went off, Ben Derrick said, "You can get up now, this bleeping game is over," and the Eagles was celebrating that championship.
I'm almost positive it was Jim Taylor who was laying on top of it, if I remember correctly. But
who maybe had the ball? Yeah, I'm not debating that at all. I don't recall. Yeah.
And you know, and as far as going forward in the early 60s, of course, Green Bay just got better and better. They win 5 out of 6.
What happened, Mac? So they lose the championship game in 1960 to the Eagles, but they'd arrived on the big stage. So they win the championship in 61 and 62. The Packers beat the Giants. Okay.
Right.
And in 63, it was the Chicago Bears beating the Giants in the championship game. Darn Giants, Mac. Your Giants would keep getting to the championship game. They only won it, I think, in 1956 before the Super Bowl era, I believe. Okay, they didn't win it those years in the 60s because they were beaten by Lombardi's Packers, and then to lose to the Bears 14-10 in 1963. I mean,
why are you rubbing it in now? I was 1 year old, Jack. I had nothing to do with that. Listen. The Chicago Bears were no joke either back then. Really, I mean, they were a good team. They maybe shouldn't be the Giants that bad, but anyway.
No, 14-10
listen,
isn't bad. They shouldn't have maybe. It was there for the Giants to win a championship after losing to the Packers in the title game 2 years in a row before that.
Listen, our coaching staff was deprived. We lost Vince Lombardi and Tom Landry. I mean, two of the greatest coaches in history of football left our staff. So, we weren't, as good as we possibly could have been.
Well, Giants too. They lost. Wow. Giants win the championship in 56, but they lose to the Colts in 58 and 59.
Yes.
And especially the title game in 58 ushered in the era of big-time NFL football, reportedly, where the Colts beat the Giants in overtime. Yeah.
Yeah, Frank Gifford had the first down against the Colts. The game was over. Anyway, don't get me started on that.
I would love for that to be a replay to kind of play it back and see whether that was the case, like the ball placement. I mean, it's amazing to think of what Gifford said. The official where he placed the ball, if he placed the ball where Gifford said it should have been placed, how football history would have changed. The game probably doesn't go into overtime. The Giants are probably NFL champions, but and even though it's a great game, it's not a classic game, So
Right.
How does it affect the NFL? The NFL eventually would be as big as it was today eventually, but that was really gave the NFL the big push forward.
That's very true. So, again, Lombardi had such a tremendous effect on the players, during and after. Very religious guy. His nickname was the Pope, believe it or not. But he was very, very charismatic. You'll see him on the films and everything. And, a lot of questions, Jack, about Lombardi compared to Lambeau. Who was the better head coach? And Lambeau was no throwaway. I mean, he was a great coach back in the early 20s and 30s with the Packers. So it took a good 40 years or 30 to 40 years for the Packers to come back. But you see the field is named after Lambeau. So that was always
Lambeau Field. I'm glad the Packers are keeping the name. I'm glad they're keeping the name Lambeau Field, because they're respecting the history with Curly Lambeau, what he meant to that organization. And with Lombardi, the Super Bowl trophy is named after him, the Lombardi Trophy.
Yeah, and I hope that never changes either. So the Green Bay Packers, for the time he was there, goes on to almost unmatched success. I mean, there's a few teams that did it, but very few teams that matched his success. He wins his he leaves Green Bay, Jack. I think he had medical problems, if I remember correctly. He does go coach for the Washington Redskins, who were terrible again, and Lombardi had a way of flipping the script. He kind of meets one of he kind of gets together with one of his players of a long time ago, Sam Huff, and they have a winning season, Jack, and that might have been his best coaching year ever.
Well, I don't know if it wasn't his best coaching year, but the Washington Redskins hadn't had a winning season in 14 years, and Lombardi got him to a winning season. They were 7-5-2. he had a franchise quarterback in Sonny Jurgensen. And, unfortunately, he got sick afterwards. And, you sometimes wonder these guys who are legends and they die, at an early age. Had he continued to coach, would the NFL eventually have caught up to him? I mean, we don't know. I mean, he could have had a Bill Parcells type career after he left the Giants. Bill Parcells was a very good coach after he left the Giants. He never got to a Super Bowl again, but he improved the teams he was with. Even the Cowboys, who hadn't gone to the playoffs in a while, he took them to the playoffs 2 out of the 4 years he was there, Parcells. He turned the Jets around and made them much better than they were, even though they never got to a Super Bowl. You wonder would that have been the case with Lombardi, with the Redskins? Would they have had a winning program but not quite have won a championship? I mean, we'll never know.
Yeah, I mean, certain coaches, I think they talk about changing cultures and changing the way people do things. And, I think the hardest thing you can do as a head coach is not come in with a bunch of X and O's and come up with this strategy that you either bring back or there's a twist to it to make the scheme that you're running on offense or defense better. I think it has a lot to do with the locker room and the chemistry of the team and going in one direction, everybody on board. And there's certain coaches, Jack, that can do that. And the coaches that can do that are the ones that become legends. All the way from, George Halas all the way up to Bill Belichick. I mean, they seem to be great leaders. And whether they're old school, hard, or whether they're a player's coach, they seem to have everybody on board. And I think that's the hardest thing you can do, to get your coaching staff on board, your players on board, and all working for one thing, because there's so many distractions, a lot more distractions today than there was back then. As you see, Bill Belichick kind of wore off. I think that's what happened with Bill Belichick, Jack. I think he wore off. I think he finally got to the point where the players said, what do you mean the Patriots way? I think that happened.
No, that didn't happen, Belichick. No, that never happened, because he had a young team and they weren't winning, but they didn't have any standout players who would talk back. If he still had his veterans like Brady, Welker, Edelman, etc., who already had a winning culture with them, and then they started losing, maybe the players would have rebelled to a degree or questioned him more. But when you have a young team that's developing and guys just want to make a career in the NFL, they didn't give Belichick a hard time. It was losing that undid him, not having control of the team.
Well, and why I say that, Jack, and when Belichick moved people into positions that shouldn't have been there, and then you had their young rookie quarterback going outside the team to talk to Alabama, and to me that Tom Brady would have never
That's
done.
A good point, Mac Jones, what he did. It backs up what you said a moment ago to an extent. So maybe
Right.
I have to backtrack just a little in my
Right. I'm
rebuttal.
not. Yeah. Listen. If he still had, Tony Bruschi and all those guys that were somewhat in their prime, yeah, of course, I think there wouldn't have been a problem. I just think, because of some moves, you lose what you had there. Judge being an offensive coordinator makes no sense. I don't care if you like the guy or don't like the guy, and that kind of. I think the team says, what are you doing? He's not an offensive. I think players will do that. If they don't say it out loud, I think they're thinking that, Jack. And I think that's what happened with Belichick. And I agree. Listen, I agree with you, Belichick. The team still played hard, even when they were losing. I think that was still there. I just think they started questioning his moves and and can you imagine your rookie quarterback going outside asking a college team? Oh my God, that dude! I think he would have been gone way back when. I don't know. It was
his second year. Yeah. Like a Tom Brady can get his own personal trainer, and Belichick will hate it and want him to use the team's trainer. But Brady has the power. What's Belichick really going to do? Sit him on the bench, cut him? It's just. So Brady had that power, but Mac Jones, the only way Mac Jones gets away with it if he performs in the field. You perform in the field, you can get away with it to an extent. You know, you can, but if you're not performing at the top level and you can be replaced, you better get along with the coach normally.
I agree. The closest thing, back to the Packers, right, for a second, the closest thing I've seen in modern day in the last few years to the Packer running game with Jim Taylor and Horning too, to some extent, but mainly Jim Taylor, is the Tennessee Titans with Derrick Henry when he played with them. Pretty close, you know, the area blocking, or they call it zone blocking now. Pretty much Derrick Henry picking his hole and jumping all over it. And that's as close as I've seen in modern day, in today's football, to the Green Bay power sweep.
Well, Derrick Henry was a straight ahead runner. No one has ever really adopted the Packer power sweep, because supposedly the defensive linemen, the safeties, you can move them up, and they're quick, strong, agile. So it's a little, it's harder to get away with power sweeps today. It really is. Your blocking has got to be outstanding, you know, for you to keep running that play over and over.
Yeah, I agree. I remember hearing a story of three coaches sitting down. I think it was Parcells' group of coaches, him, Belichick. I'm not 100% sure about this, Jack, but one of the players came in and they were having a debate about the Green Bay power sweep, and it was like a 30-minute debate of how it worked. So anyway, all right.
Parcells, he was interested in that, as I recall.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. I think everybody was interested in that.
Oh, no, certain of these old-time coaches like Bill Parcells, I'm sure they had tremendous respect for some of these old-time coaches, the way they did things, and they didn't mind bringing it back, you know, if they could incorporate it in their game plan.
Definitely. So, folks, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us as we cover a lot in baseball today that happened, including, you know, the Yankees, the early 60s Yankees. We talked a lot about that. Boxing with Jack is always fun because he'll say things I've never heard before, even in baseball sometimes. I'm just like, what are you talking about? But anyway, I'm glad. That's why Jack is one of the best co-hosts there is. And, of course, we talked about the Green Bay Packers. What a team, one of the best organizations from in the 60s anyway, in all time. Maybe they could play against today's some of today's teams and beat them. Probably some of them. I don't think it beat all of them, but I think they give them a heck of a run for their money, Jack. So they'd have to adjust a little bit. But I think the Green Bay Packers with Vince Lombardi give anybody a hard time. So, folks, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow on the Big Football Show and more. Stay with us tomorrow too. Stay with Roku all day today and tomorrow, and we'll see you real soon. You guys have a great day. And that's what we do here every Saturday. We remember then. So have a good one, folks. We'll see you soon.